I stood at my granddaughter's birthday party when my own son pointed at me and said, "You're not part of this family anymore. Get out." I brought an old velvet box, and inside was something that would destroy everything he built on lies. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now so you won't miss the next shocking episodes we bring to you. The late afternoon light poured over the weathered rooftops of Old Salem like honey coating the quiet town in a soft amber glow. Wind rustled the ivy-covered fences and swayed the ancient chimes hanging from porches that had seen better days. At the end of Willow Lane stood a forgotten house with peeling shutters, chipped paint, and a wraparound porch that creaked with every breeze. It didn't look abandoned, just left behind. Inside sat Eleanor Grace. 74 years old, she was as much a fixture of the town as the house itself. Her frame was delicate but not weak, more like a bird that had learned to endure long winters. Her white hair was pulled back into a bun, and her thin fingers rested on the arms of a rocking chair that hadn't moved all day. Across from her, a cup of untouched chamomile tea had gone cold. Eleanor's eyes, sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses, drifted to a faded photograph resting on the mantel. In it, a younger version of herself stood beside her husband, Henry. Grace tall, kind-eyed, with a hand on the shoulder of their young son, Marcus. Eleanor studied the boy's toothy grin, the gap where his front tooth had once been, the joy in his crooked smile. She blinked slowly as if holding back something unspoken. Henry had died when Marcus was just 10. A heart attack in his sleep, no warning, no goodbyes. From that moment on, Eleanor had stepped into the storm alone. 2 jobs, barely enough sleep, but always enough love. Every dollar saved went into Marcus's education. Every prayer, every scar on her palms from cleaning homes and fixing dresses, all for him, and he had made her proud. Marcus Grace, now 45, was an accomplished architect, featured in glossy magazines with his designer wife, Vivian. They lived 2 cities over in a gated community near Denver with their teenage daughter, Lyna, who Eleanor hadn't seen in nearly a year. The visits had slowed years ago. The calls became distant, then rare. Eleanor stopped asking why. She told herself they were busy. Important people had important schedules. But sometimes late at night she whispered to herself, "They forgot me. I am no longer part of their world." Until this morning, the mailbox creaked as she opened it, its hinges screaming like it hadn't been touched in days. Bills, ads, and then a cream-colored envelope. Thick paper, formal lettering. Her heart skipped. She recognized Vivian's cursive instantly. Back inside, her hands trembled as she sat down and unfolded the letter. She read it once, then again, a third time slower. "Dear Eleanor, you are cordially invited to Lyna's Sweet 16 celebration. Saturday, 6:30 p.m., the Grand Oak Ballroom Hotel, Larkspur, Denver. Please dress appropriately. Do not forget to bring the black velvet box." That was it. No warmth, no greeting. Just instructions, the kind you might send to a stranger. Eleanor stared at the last line, the black velvet box. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't thought about that box in decades. Moving slowly, she crossed the living room, then disappeared into her bedroom. Reaching up to the back of her closet behind old photo albums and moth-eaten scarves, she pulled down a rectangular box wrapped in a faded silk shawl. Dust clung to it like regret. She set it on the table and hesitated. Then, with a quiet breath, she opened it. Inside lay a folded letter paper, yellowed by time corners, curled the ink slightly blurred but still legible. Henry's handwriting. Last will and testament of Henry Grace. She unfolded it carefully. The letter wasn't notarized, not filed, but it was real, written in Henry's unmistakable script. The house, this old, creaking sanctuary they built their life in, was not meant to pass automatically to Marcus. It was to go to the grandchild who proved they understood legacy, family, love, not bloodline, not wealth. Eleanor sat motionless, heart pounding. Why had Vivian requested the box now? Why at Lyna's birthday? What did they know, or What did Lyna know? Years ago, Lyna used to send her drawings and voice notes, silly things like, "Hi, Grammy, I love your cookies," and "When can I come sleep over?" But those had stopped around the time Marcus built his company's first headquarters. The velvet box trembled slightly in Eleanor's hands. Was this some elaborate game, a power play? Or was there still a part of Lyna buried beneath her mother's polished world that remembered her grandmother's warmth, her stories, her sacrifice? Whatever it was, she knew one thing. She would bring the box. Not for Vivian, not for Marcus, but for the truth. Saturday was 4 days away, but something had already begun to shift in the air, like the moment before a summer storm, heavy still and waiting to break. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her reflection mirrored faintly in the glass of the family photo. She reached over, touched Henry's face gently, and whispered, "Let's see what your words are worth now." Under the dim hum of a single lamp, Eleanor Grace sat on the edge of her bed, the silence of her home louder than it had been in years. The invitation to Lyna's birthday lay open on the nightstand, its neat calligraphy staring at her like a command. "Please dress appropriately. Bring the black velvet box." The words echoed in her chest like the slow, methodical toll of a church bell. Not a request, not a warm reminder, a directive, like she were some antique being summoned out of a cabinet for decorative display. She had been many things in her lifetime, wife, mother, seamstress, caretaker, but never an ornament. She rose slowly, feeling the ache in her knees spread like fog. Her hands moved almost instinctively, pulling open the doors of her wardrobe. Inside hung only a handful of garments, plain dresses, cotton blouses, one modest coat. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and old books, the fabric of her life frayed, faded, and deliberate. Then her fingers brushed something at the very end of the rack. Wrapped carefully in plastic, sealed as though against time itself, was the dress. That dress. She hadn't touched it in decades. She tugged it forward. It was an elegant sky blue cheongsam trimmed in cream silk, with hand-stitched chrysanthemums blooming along the collar. Henry had it made for her on their wedding day. He'd been 23, broke and madly in love. Eleanor could still hear his voice the morning he presented it to her, bashful, boyish. "I traded 2 weeks of pay to get it made. Tell me you love it." She did. She always had. She hadn't worn it since the day they buried him. Eleanor brought the dress to her chest and inhaled. The scent was faint now, almost imperceptible. Time had eaten most of it, but she could still trace the ghost of Henry's aftershave and the warmth of jasmine tea on his breath. "You should wear this when you feel like yourself is slipping," he'd once said late one night, lying beside her with the fan squeaking overhead. "When the world starts pulling you in 100 directions, put this on. It'll remind you who you are." She unfolded it with trembling hands and laid it across the bed. The silk shimmered in the lamplight, alive with memories. Slowly, carefully, she began her quiet ritual of preparation. She heated water for a washcloth and patted down her face, applied cold cream to her cheeks, combed her thinning white hair back and twisted it into a soft bun, just like the one Henry always said made her look like the heroine in an old movie. Her hands moved with quiet grace, though her joints resisted with every motion. As she dabbed powder on her face, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was old. Her eyes were hooded with time, her lips thin, her skin marked with lines drawn by grief and years of sacrifice. But there was a sharpness behind those eyes that had never dulled a flicker of the Eleanor who had once held her family together with nothing but willpower and cracked hands. Tonight she would not arrive at that ballroom a relic. She would walk in carrying the truth. She turned toward the vanity and opened the top drawer. Nestled between mothballs and safety pins sat the black velvet box. It seemed to pulse with energy now. She lifted it gently, placed it on the table again, and stared. Her husband had called it the vault of belief. She remembered the first time he handed it to her. They had just buried her mother. Eleanor had spent days locked in grief, barely speaking, barely moving. Henry came home from work one night with a solemn expression and set the box on her lap without saying a word. "What is this?" she whispered. "Something I've been holding for you. Something I think only you'll understand when it's time." She had opened it, seen the folded letter inside, and read his writing. Do not use this to fight. Use this to remember. When the moment comes where you feel your place in the world slipping from your fingers, when love and blood grow cold, open this and choose what you believe in again. She hadn't understood then. She was 34, still convinced she could fix everything with a home-cooked meal and the right apology. But now she understood. The moment had come. She ran her hands along the velvet and closed her eyes. The weight of it, not just physical but spiritual, settled into her lap like a child she once held. She remembered Henry's hands folding hers over the box, his eyes saying trust even when his lips didn't. The years after his death had been brutal. Raising Marcus alone had cost her more than she liked to admit. She'd missed birthdays gone without meals stitched until her fingers bled, and she never once asked for thanks, because she believed love was repayment enough, because she thought a child could see what's invisible sacrifice. But children don't see. They absorb. They learn. And when their world offers them opulence, they forget the road that led them there. Marcus forgot. He forgot what it meant to sleep in a single bed with no heater, forgot what it meant to share soup for 3 nights and act like it was a game, forgot who helped him write his first college essay, who held him after his first heartbreak, who gave up her own chance at a career just to see him graduate. Vivian made sure he forgot. She saw Eleanor as a shadow, a shame, a piece of the past too raw to fit into their curated present. And Marcus, too eager to keep his perfect world intact, had played along. But Eleanor never stopped remembering, and now the box was back in play. Why had Vivian mentioned it? Why now? There was only one answer that made sense. They planned to use it against her. Maybe Vivian thought the letter would make her look crazy, sentimental. Maybe she planned to read it aloud and mock it in front of guests. Maybe it would be a game, a cruel sideshow for the rich. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Then a quieter voice surfaced, one she hadn't heard in years. What if it wasn't Vivian who asked for the box? What if it was Lyna? The girl had been kind, once bright-eyed, curious, asking questions no one else had patience for. She used to love hearing about the days when Eleanor and Henry danced barefoot in the garden or saved dimes in a tin labeled Paris someday. Lyna had loved that tin. She called it the dream jar. But Lyna had grown into her mother's world. Her silence had become echo, her smile curated. Eleanor hadn't received a single letter message or even a photo in over a year, and yet, 16. That number echoed. That age when the heart begins to question what it's been taught. Maybe she found the letter. Maybe she read it. Maybe this is her reaching for something that feels real. Eleanor felt a tremor in her chest, not fear, but something close to hope. Something close to pain. She stood up and slipped into the cheongsam. It clung tighter than she remembered, but still fell over her figure with elegance. The silk shimmered softly against the low light. She buttoned the collar, her fingers fumbling twice before fastening the final clasp. Then she stepped back from the mirror. For the first time in years, she looked like someone who hadn't given up, like someone who remembered who she was before the forgetting began. She picked up the black velvet box and tucked it into a worn leather bag. Saturday night was coming, and Eleanor Grace would not walk into that ballroom to beg. She would walk in to bear witness to the truth, to love lost and unreturned, to promises once made and perhaps, just perhaps, still remembered. The grand oak ballroom shimmered beneath a constellation of chandeliers. Gold accents lined the white marble pillars. Crystal glasses chimed delicately as servers in black and white tuxedos wove between tables covered in silk. Every surface gleamed. Every corner was choreographed. It wasn't just a party, it was a performance, and Eleanor Grace had just walked into the wrong play. She stepped through the double doors with careful poise, her fingers wrapped tightly around the worn leather strap of her handbag. Inside it, the black velvet box rested silently, heavier than ever. Her dress, the soft blue cheongsam from her wedding day, brushed against her ankles with every hesitant step. No one greeted her. She stood at the entrance for a beat too long, letting her eyes adjust to the bright interior. A sudden hush didn't come as she'd hoped. No delighted smiles, no gasps of warmth, just sidelong glances, murmured comments, a flicker of confusion in the eyes of those who didn't recognize her, or worse, those who did but wished they didn't. Her throat tightened. She moved forward slowly, weaving between people who barely shifted to make space. Laughter erupted from the far side of the room. A group of women in satin gowns sipped champagne near the massive tiered cake glowing beneath a flood of soft light. Gold letters hung above the dessert table, Sweet 16, Lyna Grace. Eleanor's eyes searched the crowd until she saw them. Vivian stood in the center like a queen at court draped in a crimson sheath dress, lips painted the color of garnets. One hand poised on a glass of wine. Marcus stood beside her in a slate gray suit freshly pressed, smiling politely as someone patted him on the back. Vivian spotted Eleanor first. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Instead, she leaned toward her husband, whispering something behind the rim of her glass. Marcus turned his head. His expression didn't change. No joy, no relief. Just a tight-lipped nod as if confirming an unwanted arrival. Vivian approached alone. "Well," she said, tilting her head, voice cool and saccharine, "you made it." Eleanor managed a quiet "Hello, Vivian." The younger woman's eyes traveled from Eleanor's shoes to her collar, lingering a little too long on the silk dress. "That's quite a nostalgic outfit." Eleanor didn't answer. Vivian's smile sharpened. "There's a table near the kitchen. Less noise. You'll be comfortable there." The words hit like a slap. Not a single thank you for coming. Not a "how have you been?" Vivian gestured to a passing server. "Could you bring a chair? Mrs. Grace will be joining us tonight. Oh, and maybe set out some extra dessert forks. She might be willing to help clean up later." A few heads turned. A few chuckled. Eleanor stood rooted, her breath caught behind her ribs. Vivian leaned in closer, her voice dropping just enough for only Eleanor to hear. "Try not to spill tea on the linens." Eleanor said nothing. Her jaw clenched behind her composed smile. From behind them a voice rang out. "Lena's about to come out." The lights shifted. Music swelled. Guests turned toward the grand staircase at the far end of the room. And there she was. Lyna descended like a swan, 16 and statuesque in a soft lavender gown, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Cameras flashed. Applause rippled across the room. Vivian beamed like she'd won an award. Marcus raised his glass. Eleanor's eyes welled despite herself. She's grown so much. For a flicker of a moment, as Lyna reached the final step and caught Eleanor's gaze across the room, something unguarded appeared in her eyes. Surprise, softness, but it was gone in a blink. Vivian rushed to her daughter, pressing a kiss to her cheek and guiding her to the center of the ballroom, where gifts had begun to pile atop a mirrored table. Boxes wrapped in silver foil, jewelry cases, perfume sets. Eleanor moved slowly through the crowd, feeling invisible and yet strangely exposed. She stopped a few feet away, waited for her turn, then opened her handbag and gently withdrew the black velvet box. She approached Lyna directly, holding it out with both hands. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said softly. "This was from your grandfather." Before Lyna could react, Vivian's hand shot out and snatched the box. "Oh my God," she laughed. "You actually brought it." Lyna looked startled. Vivian held the box up, turning to the crowd as though unveiling an ancient artifact. "Everyone look. The legendary black box has arrived." Some guests laughed awkwardly. Others smiled uncertainly. "Let's see what kind of antique we've got in here," Vivian said, fingers already working the clasp. "Vivian, please," Eleanor whispered, stepping forward. But Vivian ignored her. She opened the box with theatrical slowness, lifting the lid as if expecting treasure. And then she froze. Inside sat the small silver-framed mirror, delicate heirloom aged, its backing etched with initials and floral vines. Next to it, folded and yellowed, was Henry's letter. The last will. The words, "To the grandchild who understands legacy," visible in faded script. Vivian stared at the items in disbelief, then disdain. "A mirror," she scoffed. "Is this supposed to be symbolic or just sad?" She pulled it out and held it up for everyone to see. An old mirror and... what is this? She unfolded the letter, squinting at the handwriting. A will. Lyna stepped forward. Mom. But Vivian cut her off. Seriously. You bring a dusty piece of glass and a dying man's bedtime story for Lyna's 16th. It's not just a story, Eleanor said quietly, her voice shaking. It's his words, his wishes. Vivian turned toward her, waving the paper in the air. This isn't notarized. It's not legal. It's not even typed. Do you expect us to take this seriously? It's not about the law, Eleanor said. It's about truth. It's about who we are. Vivian laughed short and cold. No, it's about attention, about dragging old ghosts into the spotlight, about making this night about you. More guests were watching now. Even Marcus had moved closer, frowning. Eleanor's hands trembled at her sides. This house, she said, gesturing faintly with her head, was never meant to be measured in dollars. It was built with love, with hands that bled. Henry left this because he believed one day someone would remember what mattered. And what exactly do you think matters tonight? Vivian snapped, her voice sharp. Designer gowns, legacy heirlooms, your nostalgia. No, Eleanor said. Dignity. The word cracked in the air like glass. Silence fell. Eleanor turned her gaze to Lyna, who hadn't moved. I brought it for you, sweetheart, she said. But only if you want it. Lyna looked at the mirror in her mother's hand, then at the paper, then back at her grandmother. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Marcus stepped forward at last. Vivian, he said carefully. Maybe we should— I'm done, Eleanor whispered, too soft for most to hear. Then louder, steadier, I've brought what I came to bring. She reached out and took the mirror from Vivian's frozen hand. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back into the box, and closed it. Then she turned, not waiting for permission or parting words. She walked out of the ballroom with her head held high, the sound of champagne glasses clinking behind her like laughter from another world. And her heart, despite the tremor, beat with a strange and sudden clarity. She wasn't broken. She was finally done pretending she ever belonged in their world. Under the velvet glow of the ballroom chandeliers, the laughter didn't die. It just bent, became sharper, more directed, with the kind of performative amusement that wasn't meant to entertain, but to humiliate. Vivian stood at the center of it all, Henry's yellowed will in her manicured hands, holding it between two fingers, like it might stain her skin. Her voice rang out theatrical and mocking as she read the first lines aloud. To my beloved wife, Eleanor Grace. Oh, how romantic, she sneered, batting her lashes toward the crowd. I leave this house, this legacy, to the grandchild who understands the meaning of family not by blood alone, but by heart. She looked up, waiting for the snickers, and they came. A few hesitant, a few bold. One man even muttered something about Grandma's bedtime stories, and a ripple of chuckles followed. Vivian continued, voice exaggerated, almost sing-song, not to be measured in wealth or lineage, but in remembrance and love. She trailed off, grinning. Oh, Eleanor, you missed your calling. You could have been a novelist or a fortune cookie writer. Another burst of laughter, this time louder, meaner. Eleanor's hands tightened into fists. Across the room, Marcus stood stiffly, his arms crossed. He wasn't laughing, but he wasn't stepping in either. His gaze flickered between his wife, the crowd, and the floor, as if trying to disappear into the hardwood. Eleanor stepped forward, voice low but firm. Give that back. Vivian blinked at her. Excuse me, the letter, Eleanor said. That's not yours. It wasn't written for you. Vivian gave a short, dry laugh. No, you're right. It wasn't. It was written for some imaginary world where teacups matter more than deeds. But this— she held the paper higher. This is nonsense, sentimental garbage. Eleanor's throat burned. It's not garbage. It's Henry's last words. No, Vivian replied coolly. It's your last attempt to cling to something you no longer have. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Viv, she raised her hand. Let's not pretend this is anything more than a stunt. Eleanor turned to her son, her voice breaking. Marcus, are you going to let her speak to me like this? He hesitated, and that pause, half a second too long, was enough. Vivian seized it. You want him to defend you now? She snapped. After years of guilt trips and passive-aggressive phone calls, after all the times you reminded him of how much you sacrificed. Oh, please. Your guilt isn't a gift, Eleanor. It's a leash. That's not true, Eleanor said softly. No. Vivian took a step forward, eyes burning. You parade in here on Lena's birthday, bringing your little antique drama in a box, trying to hijack the evening with your faded memories. You want us to clap for your pain, is that it? I came to give my granddaughter something real, Eleanor said, voice trembling. Vivian scoffed. She has everything she needs. Trust funds, private tutors, international vacations. She doesn't need a cracked mirror and a lecture about humility. Eleanor stepped forward, reaching for the box in Vivian's hand. Give it back. But before she could touch it, Marcus stepped in. Mom, he said, voice low and firm. That's enough. She froze. What? You're making a scene, he said, eyes hard now. This isn't the time. She's insulting Henry, Eleanor said, pointing toward the letter. She's insulting everything we built. He's gone, Marcus said. And this, he gestured toward the velvet box, isn't helping anyone. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. Are you siding with her? I'm asking you, Marcus said coldly, not to ruin Lena's night. It landed like a bullet. All at once, the air left Eleanor's lungs. Her spine straightened, rigid and brittle. She looked from Marcus to Vivian, then past them to the guests, their smirks, their averted eyes, their pity. The same people who used to ask for her apple pies and family recipes now stared at her like she was something out of place. An intruder. Marcus turned to a waiter, whispered something. A few seconds later, the man returned and gestured toward the double doors. There's a balcony, Marcus murmured, not quite meeting her eyes. It's quieter. You can sit there until things settle. Eleanor looked at her son, at the face she once wiped clean with warm cloths, after nightmares, at the hands she once held as he learned to walk, and nodded. She didn't speak, didn't argue, just turned and walked out. The hallway outside the ballroom was colder, less theatrical. The buzz of laughter faded behind the doors, replaced by a stillness that felt almost sacred. Eleanor opened the glass door and stepped onto the balcony. The city lights sprawled out before her, glittering and distant. Cars moved silently below. Somewhere far off, music drifted from another event, gentler than the one she'd left behind. She walked to the far corner where a wrought iron bench sat beneath a rustling ficus and sat down. Her breath came slow, shallow. The air was cool but not biting. Still she shivered. She hadn't cried in years. Not since Henry. Not even when Marcus stopped calling. Not even when she'd spent her last Christmas alone listening to his voicemail. But now, sitting there on a balcony as her life's meaning was ridiculed, and her son turned his back, the tears came quietly. Not loud sobs, not messy, just a slow, relentless stream of grief slipping down her cheeks, caught in the collar of her dress. She didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. They were the only honest thing left tonight. Behind her, through the ballroom windows, Vivian's voice still rang out light and charming. Marcus was back at her side, smiling for photos, raising a glass. The black velvet box was nowhere in sight. And Lyna hadn't even looked back. Eleanor closed her eyes. In that moment, the city faded. The noise vanished. All that remained was the weight of memory pressing against her ribs, Henry's voice in her mind. When love turns silent, listen harder. She tried to hear the echo of his laughter, the beat of Marcus's tiny feet, the hum of their old radio playing Ella Fitzgerald in the kitchen while she kneaded bread. But all she heard now was wind. Eleanor folded her arms tightly, pressing her hands against her own heart like a shield. She sat there long after the party reached its peak, long after the music turned loud again, long after Vivian toasted to Lena's bright future under glittering lights. The woman on the balcony remained unseen, unheard, but she was no longer invisible. She was grieving, and grief, when it simmers long enough in silence, begins to boil. Upstairs, past the music, the champagne and the laughter that rang hollow through the chandelier-lit ballroom, Lyna Grace stood frozen in the hallway outside her mother's bedroom door. She hadn't spoken to anyone since her grandmother left. She hadn't clapped when the last speech ended, or posed for another photograph under the rose-colored lights. Something inside her had gone still, something she couldn't explain yet. But it had started with the look on Grandma Eleanor's face. The moment her father, the man Lyna once thought could fix anything, told his own mother to not ruin the evening, that moment had taken something from her and given her something else in return. Now in the quiet upstairs hall, Lyna's heels echoed against the hardwood as she reached for the door. Her mother's bedroom always smelled like perfume and control. It wasn't a room built for comfort. It was curated, polished, devoid of warmth. She stepped inside. The black velvet box sat on the dresser, alone, abandoned. No one had taken it seriously, not even her father. He'd stood next to her mother, silent like a well-trained portrait. Vivian had laughed at the contents as if they were a joke, and yet Lyna couldn't forget the way her grandmother had held the box, with reverence, with a sadness too deep to be faked. She reached out, picked it up, and held it in both hands. The velvet was worn smooth at the edges. The weight of it startled her, like it held more than just objects. Lyna crossed the room and sat on the window seat, tucking her legs beneath her. Outside, the city glowed like a spilled jar of fireflies. But she didn't look out. She opened the box. The mirror came first, small, oval, ornate. The kind of object a child might mistake for worthless because it didn't light up or make noise. But Lyna saw the detail, the way the floral pattern curved into initials HG for Henry Grace, her grandfather, the man she barely remembered except in photos and fragments of whispered stories. She set it gently beside her. Then with deliberate fingers she unfolded the old letter. It took her a few seconds to adjust to the writing, looped, graceful, faded in some places. But every word felt like it was written to be read in this moment. To the grandchild who understands the meaning of legacy, if this letter has found you, it means time has passed. Perhaps too much, perhaps not enough. I do not know you, but I believe in you. I believe that somewhere in your blood runs not just my name, but the heartbeat of something truer. This house you've seen in photos, the one that creaks with memory, was never just a structure. It was our first dream, your grandmother and I. We built it with calloused hands and borrowed hope. We filled it with burnt dinners and laughter and rain dripping through the roof during winter. It is not valuable because of the land beneath it. It is valuable because of the life inside it. I do not leave it to whoever is the most successful. I do not leave it to whoever speaks the loudest. I leave it to the one who remembers, who honors, who understands that love is not something owed, it is something cultivated. If that is you, take care of it, of her, of the story this house tells. Lyna finished reading and just sat. The letter shook in her hands, not from cold, from something she couldn't name. She read it again, and then again, until the weight of the words felt etched into her skin. The man in the photographs had written this, the man her mother never spoke of unless she was forced to, the man her grandmother always mentioned in softened tones, as if saying his name might wake the sadness in her chest. And suddenly, so suddenly, Lyna realized she didn't know anything real about her family. What she knew had been edited, cropped, retold with clean edges. Her mother spoke of values, of appearances, of what's best, but never of love. Never of sacrifice. Her father, he just complied. But her grandmother, this woman who had stood in front of a crowd that ignored her, insulted her, discarded her, she had brought something no one else did, history, weight, soul, and she had been told to sit on a balcony in the cold. Lyna rose from the window seat, the box still in her hands, and crossed to her mother's bookshelf. It was a shrine of status biographies of leaders, sleek novels with sprayed edges, untouched first editions. But tucked at the bottom, behind a stack of tax documents and a shoebox of jewelry receipts, was a leather-bound book, fraying at the spine. It didn't belong. She pulled it out. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, sketches of house layouts, floor plans, and scribbles that looked like half poems, half diary entries. The cover read, Henry's Ledger, for Dreams and Dust. Lyna turned to a page near the center and stopped. There it was, her grandmother's name, written in block letters, underlined, Eleanor, the root of everything, the keeper, the reminder, the woman who taught me that faith isn't always loud, but it's always there. She holds this family, even when they don't notice, especially then. Lyna's throat closed. She flipped through more pages, finding bits and pieces of a man she'd never truly known. He wrote about saving for the front porch renovation, about making Eleanor laugh after a bad day, about how proud he was when Marcus got into university. But never once did he mention Vivian, not until the final pages where his words grew shorter, sadder. I worry Marcus is forgetting where he comes from. Vivian doesn't see Eleanor. She sees what she wants to erase. I hope. That was the last word. No period, no follow-up, just I hope. Lyna sat back down on the window seat. Everything inside her felt like it was being rearranged, rewritten. She thought of her grandmother sitting alone on that balcony, not asking for attention, not yelling, just being, waiting, as always, waiting for someone to care enough to look back. Lyna reached into the box, lifted the mirror, and stared into it. What she saw wasn't vanity, it was lineage. She saw her own eyes, but softer, wiser, as if time had blurred the edges of her face into someone else's, someone older, stronger, her grandmother's eyes. The mirror trembled slightly in her hands. She clutched it close to her chest, and then with a final glance at the letter, she whispered, "I see you." Downstairs, her name was being called. Another photo op, another round of applause. She didn't move. For the first time in her life, Lyna Grace wasn't interested in being seen. She was ready to see back. The sky hadn't yet turned blue. It was that hollow hour between night and morning when the world held its breath and even the wind moved gently, afraid to disturb the silence. Lyna Grace stood on the front porch of her parents' house, the same one that had for most of her life felt like a kingdom she couldn't question. But tonight it felt like a gilded cage, a place that taught her how to smile for cameras, how to answer questions the right way, how to make herself smaller when the truth grew too big. She had never stepped outside alone at this hour before. Now barefoot in her sneakers, shoulders hunched beneath a wool coat that didn't belong to her, she stood under the dim glow of the porch light with a small suitcase in one hand and the black velvet box pressed tight to her chest. Inside the house, no one stirred. No alarms, no warnings. She had walked past her mother's bedroom silent, her father's study dark, down the grand hallway where the party decorations still hung limply, the scent of roses and champagne lingering like ghosts of the night before. She didn't look back. When the Uber pulled into the driveway, the driver didn't ask questions. He saw the determination on her face, the tears she refused to shed, and simply nodded as she slid into the back seat. "Where to?" he asked. She looked down at the velvet box. "Old Salem. Willow Lane," she whispered. "Take me to Eleanor Grace's house." The ride was quiet. Lyna watched the city pass her by. Neon signs flickered over empty sidewalks. The sky began to shift inky black, retreating into dull gray, the first hint of dawn brushing the horizon. Every block they crossed felt like a layer of her former life peeling away. Every traffic light was a decision, a vow. She clutched the box tighter. 20 minutes later, the car rolled to a stop in front of a narrow house tucked beneath a large willow tree. The street was still. The porch light flickered faintly as though unsure whether to shine or rest. Lyna stepped out. The air was cold, and the grass beneath her feet was still damp from the night. She walked slowly up the front steps, suitcase thumping behind her, then stopped at the door. Her hand hovered. What if her grandmother was asleep? What if she didn't answer? What if it was too late? She raised her fist and knocked 3 times, firm, measured. For a moment, nothing. Then a shuffle, a soft creak, and the door opened. Eleanor Grace stood in the doorway in her nightgown and shawl, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, eyes squinting against the porch light. Her gaze landed on the suitcase first, then the velvet box, then Lena's face. She didn't speak, neither did Lyna. They just looked at each other, and then like a dam cracking, Lena's breath hitched, and she stepped forward, burying herself into her grandmother's arms. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her with no hesitation, no questions. Her hands found Lena's back, her hair the curve of her shoulders like she was holding something lost and fragile and fiercely familiar. Neither said a word as they stood there in the quiet, the wind brushing through the trees, the first birds beginning to stir. Lyna trembled in her embrace. I couldn't stay," she whispered. "I couldn't." "I know," Eleanor said softly, pressing her cheek to Lena's hair. "I know, sweetheart." They stood like that for what felt like a full turn of the earth. Then Eleanor gently took the suitcase with one hand and guided Lyna inside with the other. The house was dim lit only by the stove light in the kitchen and the last of a candle flickering near the hallway mirror. It smelled of lavender old books and something warm, something alive. Lyna hadn't realized how long it had been since a house felt like that. They sat together on the old living room couch, the velvet box resting on the table between them like a shared secret. Lyna's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for Eleanor's hand. "I read his letter," she said. Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining. "He wrote it for you, even if he didn't know your name yet." Lyna's voice cracked. They laughed at it. They all laughed, and I just stood there. I didn't say anything. "You saw," Eleanor whispered. "That's more than enough." Lyna shook her head, tears finally slipping free. "I saw too late." "No," Eleanor said. "You saw exactly when you were meant to." They sat in silence, the old clock ticking softly in the background. "I found his journal too," Lyna murmured, "in Mom's office, the way he wrote about you." Eleanor looked down. Her fingers tightened slightly. "He called you the root of everything, the keeper." The word landed like a balm. Eleanor didn't speak for a long moment. Then she looked up, meeting her granddaughter's eyes. "Why did you come?" Lyna's voice was a whisper. "Because I can't live in that house anymore. It's beautiful, but it's empty. There's no truth, no kindness, no memory. Just silence that gets filled with noise." She took a breath. "And you last night, you were the only one who didn't pretend." Eleanor closed her eyes, pressing a hand over her mouth. Lyna placed her hand over her grandmother's again. "I want to stay here. I want to know who I came from. I want to understand what it means to carry something worth protecting." She gestured to the box. "Not this," she said. "This too, but not just this. You." Eleanor opened her eyes again. They were full now of sorrow, yes, but also something fierce and luminous. "I don't have much," she said softly. "No money, no reputation. Just this house, and the stories inside it." Lyna smiled through her tears. "Then that's more than enough for me." Outside, the first true light of morning spilled across the lawn. Inside, two women, two generations tethered by grief and love, sat side by side, beginning something neither had words for yet. But it was real, and it had finally begun. Under the soft spill of morning light, the house on Willow Lane felt different. It wasn't just the presence of a new voice echoing through the kitchen, or the scent of toast mingling with fresh-cut oranges. It was the shift in atmosphere. Something inside had awakened like old wooden floorboards stretching after years of stillness. Eleanor sat at the small kitchen table, pouring tea into 2 chipped porcelain cups. Across from her, Lyna scribbled in a notebook, brows furrowed in concentration. Her laptop sat open beside her, the screen glowing with a half-finished search bar. They hadn't slept much. After the emotional reunion, after unpacking a suitcase that carried more weight in memory than in fabric, Lyna had confessed she needed answers. She needed to know what had happened to her grandfather's legacy, and Eleanor, hesitant at first, had agreed. So they began digging. It started small. Over breakfast, Eleanor recounted what she remembered about Henry's final years, the way he worked tirelessly on sketches, even after his illness began, how he met with young entrepreneurs who sought his advice, how he was always taking calls from Marcus's business friends. She hadn't understood the details then, but now, in hindsight, certain pieces began to glimmer with meaning. Lyna took notes, cross-referenced names, searched for documents online. Then she messaged a few of her father's old college friends, people she barely knew but remembered from banquets and charity events. She asked simple questions. "Did you ever meet my grandfather? Was he involved in Grace Architectural Group's early days?" Responses trickled in slowly, but when they came, they changed everything. One friend replied, "Your grandfather. He was the backbone. Everyone knew the firm's early success was built on Henry Grace's name. It gave your dad credibility when he was just starting out. Another Henry was like a mentor to half of us. It was his reputation that got investors in the room. Everyone respected him." Lyna stared at the messages. Marcus had never said a word. In every magazine article, every company website bio, every press release, there was no mention of Henry Grace. The founding story was scrubbed clean. It was as if Marcus had birthed the empire out of thin air. Eleanor sat quietly as Lyna read the texts aloud, her tea cooling in front of her. He never gave credit, Lyna said softly. He used Grandpa's reputation, his networks, his goodwill, but never once honored it publicly. Eleanor's expression was unreadable. She sat still for a long time, then said Henry would have helped him without hesitation. But Marcus, he buried that part of the story like it was something to be ashamed of. Lyna looked up, her eyes fierce. We're not done. That afternoon they pulled boxes down from the attic, old tax forms, property papers, family correspondence. Eleanor had kept everything. Decades of receipts and records bundled in string, yellowing with time. And that's when Lyna found the second thread. It was a file labeled Property, 1987-2011. Inside were copies of the original deed to the house signed by Henry and a handwritten amendment, noting his intention to pass ownership to Eleanor alone with a posthumous inheritance clause, specifying conditional rights for descendants pending intent to preserve legacy. Lyna frowned. This isn't in the official county registry. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. It should be. Lyna checked. She opened a browser, logged into the property records database, and typed in the address. What came up chilled her. Owner of record, she read aloud, Marcus and Vivian Grace. Joint mortgage filed 2 years ago. Eleanor leaned forward. That's impossible. I never sold the house. I never even transferred the deed. Lyna clicked deeper. There it was. A loan. A 6-figure home equity line of credit secured using the house on Willow Lane as collateral. Vivian's name appeared on the application. No, Eleanor whispered, voice trembling. No one even asked me. Lyna's heart pounded. This is fraud. Legal fraud. Eleanor looked stunned. Her hands trembled on the table. They forged my permission. They must have, Lyna said. There's no way you signed this. And if you didn't, this could be criminal. She scrolled further. And look here. The appraisal was manipulated. It says this is a jointly owned property based on marital inheritance, which is complete fiction. Eleanor buried her face in her hands. Henry warned me. He said there'd be a time I'd have to defend what we built. Lyna was already typing, pulling up the county clerk's office, searching for legal assistants, real estate attorneys, anything. Her pulse raced. This isn't just disrespect, she said. This is theft. They used your home, the one Grandpa built with his bare hands, as leverage. They risked everything you own. She stood abruptly, pacing. Mom must have signed off. Maybe she even masterminded it. And Dad. He went along with it, like he always does. Eleanor looked up, eyes heavy. I should have seen this coming. I wanted to believe Marcus wouldn't cross that line. Lyna stopped. But I'm seeing it now, and I won't let it stand. They sat in silence again, the truth settling around them like dust. Then Lyna whispered. He erased Grandpa's name from the company, used it when it served him, then buried it. And now they're burying this house, Eleanor said, while I'm still alive. The words hung in the air. Lyna reached out and squeezed her grandmother's hand. Not anymore. She stood, fire rising in her chest. We're going to take it back. The story, the house, everything. Eleanor blinked, a glimmer of something ancient stirring behind her eyes. What will we do? Lyna's voice didn't waver. We start by telling the truth. The air inside the lawyer's office was sterile leather chairs, paneled wood, and the faint scent of old paper and antiseptic ambition. A mahogany clock ticked steadily on the far wall, counting the minutes as if something inevitable waited on the other side. Eleanor Grace sat stiffly beside her granddaughter, fingers clenched around her handbag. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm behind them. Across from them sat Jonathan Bremer, a probate attorney recommended by one of Lyna's contacts. He was in his early 50s, dressed in navy, with a kindness in his voice that didn't dull its precision. You did the right thing coming in, he said, flipping through the yellowed document. This is powerful. Lyna leaned forward. The will is valid. Bremer nodded. Not only valid, it's notarized and dated, registered at the county level. This isn't just a sentimental letter. This is a legally binding document. And by the looks of it, your grandfather had very clear intentions. He looked at Eleanor. You're the executor. The house was placed in a conditional trust. Your husband designated that it passes to the grandchild who demonstrates moral stewardship, and until then the property belongs solely to you. Eleanor swallowed hard. Then how did it end up in their names? Bremer's smile thinned. That's what we need to investigate. If your son and his wife used this house to secure a loan under false pretenses without your consent and without disclosing the existing trust, it could constitute fraud, possibly even criminal conspiracy. Lyna looked at her grandmother. We can fight this. Eleanor exhaled slowly. We must. That night, Lyna sat in her bedroom with headphones on, listening. She had placed her phone on the edge of the marble kitchen counter earlier that afternoon, set to record. She had been home briefly to gather things, as she told her mother, but her real purpose had been sharper, more deliberate. Her parents had never learned to whisper when they thought they were safe. Now their voices came clearly through the playback. We need to shut this down, Marcus. If your mother gets any ideas, we could lose everything. She won't. She doesn't even understand how mortgages work. She doesn't have to understand it. Lena's with her. That girl's not stupid. She's been asking questions. A pause. Vivian's voice again colder. You should have told me when you used the deed, Marcus. It wasn't supposed to matter. We were going to pay it off before anyone noticed. And now she's got a lawyer. Jesus, Marcus. More static. Then, you're going to have to convince your mother to drop this. Tell her she misunderstood. Tell her Henry never meant for that letter to mean anything. If it goes to court, it won't. You better pray it won't. Lyna stopped the recording. Her fingers trembled as she labeled the audio file, encrypted it, and saved it to 3 separate cloud folders. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a witness. The summons arrived 2 days later. Marcus Grace was being called in for a preliminary deposition regarding an alleged unlawful transfer of property ownership and mortgage fraud. He called Eleanor first. It was the first time he'd spoken to her since the birthday party. She didn't answer. He left a message, Mom. Please, this is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Then he called Lyna. She answered. Sweetheart, he began. His voice was gentle, rehearsed. I think things have escalated too far. Your grandmother's confused, and I don't want this to turn into something ugly. Lyna didn't raise her voice. It already has. Lyna, I was trying to protect the family. By using Grandpa's name to build your company and never once giving him credit. Silence. By forging Grandma's ownership and putting her home up as collateral. Lyna, I have recordings, Dad. His breath caught. You lied, you and Mom. And you used the thing that mattered most to her, this house, as leverage for your own success. This is our house, too, he snapped suddenly. You wouldn't have that legacy if not for me, no, Lyna said softly. If not for her, none of us would. Then she hung up. At the deposition, Marcus showed up in a charcoal suit flanked by his own attorney, slick-haired, aggressive, and full of defensive bluster. Across from them, Eleanor sat quietly beside Bremer, her chin lifted, her hands folded in her lap. Lyna sat behind her, a silent pillar. The opposing lawyer began by trying to dismantle the will's language. Moral stewardship is subjective. A court can't enforce that. Bremer countered calmly. But the trust parameters are not. And this trust was legally binding. The home was not Marcus Grace's to mortgage, nor was it Vivian Grace's to access without consent. The signatures on the mortgage paperwork do not match Eleanor Grace's authenticated signature. The defense shifted to strategy 2. There was an understanding that the house would eventually pass to Marcus Grace as the only son. This wasn't theft, it was anticipation. Bremer handed over a transcript. Please review this audio recording in which the Graces openly discuss hiding the trust and silencing Eleanor Grace to protect financial interests. Marcus paled. The room grew still. For the next 30 minutes, Bremer laid out the timeline how Henry Grace's will was written, registered, and witnessed, how Marcus never disclosed the trust's conditions, how the mortgage loan was filed using misrepresented documents, how the bank had no knowledge of the property's trust structure because Marcus and Vivian had kept it off the books. At the end of the hearing, the mediator requested a formal review. Marcus would be investigated for breach of trust, and pending the outcome, the mortgage could be deemed invalid. Vivian didn't show up, but she called that night. She didn't ask how Eleanor was. She didn't apologize. She said one thing. You think you've won, Eleanor. But what happens when Lyna wants something you can't give her? Eleanor responded without hesitation. Then I'll give her what you never did, honesty. And hung up. Back on Willow Lane, Lyna and Eleanor sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, the velvet box between them once more. This time not as a mystery or a weapon, but as an heirloom returned to its rightful place. "I don't know how this ends," Eleanor whispered. Lyna looked out at the fading sunset. "It ends when we decide it's ours again, and in that quiet where fear once lived, something stronger bloomed. Resolve, legacy reclaimed, and war gently shifting into something far more powerful truth. It began with a headline: Inheritance Lawsuit. Rocks. Grace Architectural Group. Mother versus son in Hoi An legacy dispute. The story dropped like a stone in still water, sending ripples across the business and social circles Marcus Grace had carefully cultivated for 2 decades. Within hours, the article spread beyond Hoi An, picked up by national outlets. The images were striking Marcus in a stiff suit outside the courthouse, Eleanor Grace in a navy shawl flanked by her granddaughter, walking with quiet dignity. The caption beneath their photo read simply, "The matriarch speaks." The narrative wasn't just scandal, it was betrayal. The internet devoured it. Words like fraud, forgery, and family deceit flooded the digital landscape. Op-eds speculated whether Marcus had knowingly committed criminal real estate manipulation. Legal analysts dissected the will, the trust, and the weight of the audio recordings Lyna had courageously submitted as evidence. Clients started to back away. First came the polite cancellations, then the contracts that mysteriously dissolved. Grace Architectural's website was flooded with comments. The company's stock dipped, then fell harder as whispers turned into truths. By the end of the week, 3 of Marcus's key investors had pulled out entirely. The offices, once bustling with drafts models and champagne-clinking celebrations, grew quieter. The calls slowed. Emails were answered with automated replies. Even the receptionist, a young woman Marcus had hired for her impeccable smile, stopped making eye contact. Inside the hollow walls of the company he once claimed to build from nothing, Marcus stood alone. The silence was deafening. Vivian left 2 days later. She didn't announce it with a fight. She didn't pack with drama or sobs. She just walked in from a meeting, set her purse down, and said, "You've made your bed, Marcus." He looked up from the counter, disheveled and sleep-deprived. "What are you talking about?" Her hands moved with purpose, one rolling up silk blouses, the other sliding shoes into a suitcase. "The board is calling for your resignation. They don't want to be associated with a public scandal involving elder abuse." "I can fix it," he muttered. She zipped the suitcase hard. "You can't even fix a breakfast, Marcus." He blinked. Vivian turned to face him. "This family, this image we built it on, borrowed time. I married a man who knew how to smile at donors but couldn't look his own mother in the eye. That's not fair." "No, what's not fair," she snapped, "is that I wasted the best years of my life trying to maintain a lie you couldn't even carry to the finish line." He took a step toward her. "Vivian," she held up a hand. "And before you ask, no, I'm not going to stay and help you sweep up the shards. I have my own future to protect." "Is there someone else?" he asked, and hated the sound of his own voice, small, defeated. Vivian paused, gave him a look that wasn't cruel, just tired. "There's always someone else when the house is burning." Then she was gone. Marcus didn't chase her. He just stood in the entryway, staring at the dent in the wall from where their last family portrait had hung. The next day he went to the office. No one greeted him. His keycard still worked, but his nameplate had been removed from the executive boardroom. The board had voted unanimously to place him on indefinite leave pending legal review. His assistant wouldn't meet his gaze. She slid a cardboard box across the desk. Inside were his belongings, his father's fountain pen, a framed photo of Lyna as a child, and a paperweight engraved with the words, "Build what matters." He left without saying a word, and by the time he got home, the power had been shut off. That night he sat alone in the dark whiskey in one hand, the velvet box in the other. Not the real one, just a replica he'd tried to recreate after the first media frenzy began. Something to display, something to prove he still had ties to the family legacy. But it was empty, always had been, and in the silence he began to see it. Not the public version, not the carefully curated mask he wore to gala events. but the boy he once was, who stood in his father's workshop watching Henry run his hands over blueprints like they were living things. The boy who used to sit on Eleanor's lap while she read letters from faraway places. The boy who grew up believing that success was something you earned, not something you stole. He had buried that boy long ago. But tonight the ghost returned. At just past midnight, Marcus stood outside the old house on Willow Lane. He wasn't sure how he'd driven there, or why. He only knew that for the first time in years he had nowhere else to go. The porch light was on, faint and flickering, a memory of warmth. He stepped onto the first wooden step, pausing as it creaked beneath his weight. Then the second, then the third. He stopped in front of the door, the same one he had slammed when he first told his mother he didn't need old people's wisdom anymore. He raised his hand, knocked once, waited, knocked again. Silence. He pressed his palm flat against the wood, leaning his forehead against it. His breath fogged in the night air. "Mom," he whispered, "I know you probably won't open this door." He swallowed hard. "I don't deserve it. God knows I don't, but I just—" His voice cracked. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I lost everything." No answer. "I thought if I had the company, the wife, the reputation, that would be enough. But it was all built on you and Dad. And I never said thank you, not once. Still nothing. I used your house like a credit card," he confessed. "I ignored your letters. I erased Dad's name because it made me feel small." He rested his hand flat on the door again. "And I lost Lyna. I don't even know how to get her back." A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A curtain shifted from the second-floor window, but the door didn't open. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Marcus said. "I just needed you to hear me, just once, before it's too late." He stepped back, eyes glassy, chest heaving. For a moment he waited foolishly, childishly, for the sound of the lock turning, for the hinges to creak, for her voice. But nothing came. He stood there for another minute, then turned and walked slowly back into the night. Behind the curtain, Eleanor stood perfectly still. Lyna beside her whispered, "Why didn't you open it?" Eleanor's voice was calm, certain. "Because apologies are not performances," she said. "They're beginnings. If he really wants to change, he'll come back, with more than just regret." Outside, the wind picked up scattering leaves across the walkway, and for the first time the house stood as more than a place. It stood as a witness to truth, to the unraveling of lies, and to the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. A soft chime rang as the door opened. The scent of jasmine tea and sandalwood drifted through the air, mingling with gentle piano music playing in the background. Sunlight spilled through the wooden shutters, warming the walls of the old house that had once been forgotten, buried beneath grief, silence, and betrayal. Now it had a name. The Velvet Box. Not a cafe, not just a tea shop. It was something else entirely, part gallery, part sanctuary, part living journal of the past, and Lyna Grace stood at its heart. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid apron dusted with flour and ink. Her eyes no longer darted around searching for approval. They were steady now, grounded. Every movement she made carried purpose, from the way she placed the teapot on the counter to the way she welcomed each guest like they'd just returned home. A year had passed since the courtroom hearing, since her family's collapse made headlines, and then slowly disappeared from them. Marcus had left the city for a while. No one knew exactly where. Vivian was living abroad, seen on social media, with a man 10 years younger and a wine glass always in hand. But Lyna had stayed, here, in the house her grandfather built, in the house her grandmother protected, in the house that now belonged to both of them, not as property but as legacy. The transformation hadn't been easy. For months she and Eleanor worked side by side, peeling back wallpaper, sanding floorboards, fixing broken pipes. They sold heirlooms that had no memory attached to them. They kept the ones that did. The black velvet box now sat inside a glass case near the entrance, beside a placard that read, "For the one who remembers." Above it hung a black and white photo of Henry Grace smiling in the workshop, blueprint in hand. Below it, a handwritten line, "Legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what we live forward." Every inch of the house held something sacred now. The front room had become the tea gallery, where guests sipped carefully brewed oolong and herbal blends sourced from small farms Lyna had personally selected. Each table held a tin of note cards and calligraphy pens, an invitation for patrons to write messages to people they missed, people they forgave, people they once were. The side room, once a cluttered old den, was now a memory alcove. Visitors pinned photographs and letters to corkboard walls. Some came to read, some came to cry, most came to heal. And in the back, under the wide bay window, was Eleanor's space. She taught calligraphy there every Wednesday afternoon. Children, tourists, locals, they all came. Her hands, though slower now, still moved with grace. The soft scratch of brush against rice paper was a sound that belonged here like bird song or wind chimes. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. She was the soul of the velvet box even when she was silent, and Lyna was its heartbeat. That morning she moved through the kitchen with practiced rhythm, arranging pastries on a ceramic tray. Outside, a line had already started to form friends' neighbors, even an elderly couple from Chicago who'd read about the velvet box in a travel magazine. Eleanor entered from the garden door, cheeks pink from the wind, carrying a small basket of dried lavender. "They're back early today," she said, nodding toward the crowd. Lyna smiled. "It's Saturday, the day we always run out of almond tea and patience." Eleanor laughed low and warm. "Then let's make sure we don't run out of grace." Lyna turned toward her, eyes soft. "You always say that, because it's always true." They shared a look, one that didn't need words anymore. Later that afternoon, Lyna sat near the window journal, open steam rising from her mug. A small boy approached with his grandmother in tow. He held up a note card. "Can I pin this?" he asked. Lyna nodded. "Anywhere you like." He toddled over and pinned it right at eye level. Then he stepped back proud. Lyna tilted her head to read. "Dear Grandpa, I wish I got to meet you. Mom says I laugh like you." Eleanor read it over her shoulder. "That one's a keeper." Lyna's voice was soft. "They all are." Just then the wind picked up. Outside, leaves rustled. Bells on the porch jingled lightly. Eleanor's fingers stilled as she sipped her tea. Lyna watched her. "What is it?" Eleanor didn't answer at first. She set her cup down gently, then rose. "There's someone outside." Lyna turned toward the door. A figure stood beyond the glass hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. The years had pressed on him. His hair, once jet black, was now streaked with gray. His eyes, no longer arrogant, looked unsure. The kind of unsure that takes years to form. Marcus Grace didn't open the door. He waited. Lyna stood. Eleanor touched her arm. "You don't have to." Lyna looked at her. "I know." She crossed the room slowly, every step measured not in fear but in choice. She opened the door and stood on the threshold. Marcus removed his cap. "Hi," he said quietly. Lyna didn't reply. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he added quickly. "I just heard what you've done with the house. I had to see it." She waited. "It's beautiful," he said. "It always was. I just forgot." Lyna leaned against the doorframe. "Forgetting is one thing. Erasing is another." His shoulders dropped. "I'm sorry, Lyna, for everything, for what I did to this place, to your grandma, to you." Silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. I wanted you to know I see it now. All of it. What matters." Lyna studied him, then stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated. I said, "Come in." Marcus walked in slowly like a man stepping into memory. Eleanor was already there, arranging calligraphy scrolls. Marcus swallowed hard. "Mom." Eleanor didn't turn. "You remember this brush?" she said, holding up one of Henry's old tools. "He carved your name into the handle." Marcus's voice was barely audible. "I don't deserve to hold it." Eleanor finally turned to him. Her eyes were clear, measured. "No," she said, "but maybe you can earn it back." He nodded, a tear sliding down his cheek. Lyna watched the scene unfold, arms crossed, heart steady. And for the first time in years, the house didn't hold ghosts. It held grace, and the hum of something beginning again. The lanterns were lit early that evening. Soft, golden orbs danced gently above the sidewalk, casting warm light across the cobblestones of Willow Lane. The velvet box pulsed with the quiet rhythm of a Saturday evening cups, clinking laughter in low tones, calligraphy brushes gliding over rice paper with practiced care. Inside, Eleanor Grace poured tea with serene grace, while Lyna guided a young couple to a table near the back. The atmosphere was steady, warm. Everything was where it belonged. Outside the window, just beyond the reflection of hanging scrolls and flickering candles, a man stood still. Marcus Grace. He wasn't dressed for confrontation. No suit, no tie, just a dark gray coat worn at the edges and a scarf that flapped gently in the breeze. His hands were in his pockets, his eyes on the inside of the house, watching. It wasn't the first time. In the months since their last conversation, he had returned to that sidewalk more than once, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes standing there long enough for the streetlights to hum on above his head. But tonight felt different. Tonight the inside of the house glowed brighter, more alive, like something sacred had found a home again. And inside that light stood the two women he had once tried to forget. His mother, his daughter. Marcus shifted slightly, the ache in his chest rising. He hadn't spoken to Vivian in weeks. The silence between them now stretched like a fault line, deep and impassable. His firm was dissolved, his reputation fractured. He worked freelance projects under a pseudonym just to stay afloat. He was rebuilding, but not out of vengeance, out of necessity and regret. Inside, Eleanor moved past the counter. She poured tea with one hand and held a brush in the other, her signature strokes still fluid, still elegant. She looked up and saw him through the glass. Her expression didn't shift, not anger, not welcome, just acknowledgement, a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Marcus lowered his eyes, and then she turned her back. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. It was not her burden to hold anymore. The door to the tea house opened gently. Lyna stepped outside, arms folded, coat wrapped tight around her. She stood in front of him, eyes searching, not cold, but not naive either. In her hands she held something wrapped in deep violet silk. Marcus met her gaze. I wasn't sure if I should come. She didn't answer. I just wanted to see it. One more time. The house. What you've made it into. Still she said nothing. So he continued. I don't know what I thought would happen. I guess I hoped that maybe if I stood here long enough it would start to feel like home again. Lyna took a breath. You don't stand on a sidewalk hoping for redemption, Dad. You walk through it. You rebuild it. From the inside. He nodded slowly. Then she unwrapped the object in her hands. The antique mirror. The same one that had once sat inside the velvet box. Its silver edges still bore faint scratches. Its glass, fogged ever so slightly from age, still reflected every flaw, every truth. She placed it in his hands. He hesitated. What is this? Lyna's voice was steady. It's a mirror. A real one. Not the kind you hang in a marble hallway to impress guests. This one shows you things you'd rather not see. He looked down at it, hands trembling slightly. She stepped back. It came from Grandpa. From Grandma. From you too. Whether you like it or not, it's always reflected who we are. Marcus looked up at her. And who am I now? She held his gaze. That's not for me to say. It's not even for Grandma to decide. It's for you. The mirror shows the cracks, the scars, the guilt, but it doesn't fix anything. She took a deep breath. You do. He held the mirror close to his chest, eyes glassy. Lyna turned to walk back inside, but paused at the door. You asked if you could ever come home again. He didn't speak. She looked over her shoulder. This place isn't home because of bricks and blueprints, Dad. It's home because someone decided to protect it, to honor it. You don't need an invitation, you need courage. He nodded, barely able to breathe. Lyna stepped inside and gently closed the door behind her. And then, a sound. The wind stirred the hanging chimes on the porch beam above him, the delicate tinkle of ceramic and bamboo pieces dancing in the breeze, a sound so soft, so familiar that it sliced right through him. That sound used to lull him to sleep as a child. Now it was a signal, not forgiveness, but release. Marcus looked into the mirror once more, his reflection blurred by time and tears. He closed his eyes, and for the first time allowed the weight of his choices to settle fully on his shoulders. Inside the house, Eleanor lifted her eyes and met Lyna's across the room. Lyna nodded. Not to say everything was healed, but that healing had at last begun. And outside on a quiet street lit by lanterns and memory, a man stood holding a mirror beneath the sound of wind chimes, and chose for the first time in years to see himself clearly. Fade out. Wind. Light. Forgiveness lingering in the air like tea steam in old paper. And then silence. Beautiful, honest silence.